Part 1, The Boy Who Never Cried at His Sister's Funeral. The strangest thing about that funeral was not that a 12-year-old boy refused to cry. It was that everyone thought it meant he was strong. Germany, April 1945. The church bell rang across a village that no longer sounded like itself. The tone drifted over broken rooftops, empty gardens, and narrow streets where spring flowers had begun to grow in places no one had planted them. The war was ending, but nobody in the village seemed to know what came next. That morning, the sky hung low and gray above St. Michael's Church. The building had survived the years of hardship better than most. Its stone walls still stood. Its wooden doors still opened. Its bells still called people together when there was something important to remember. And on that morning, the bell rang for 16-year-old Emily Miller. Villagers arrived slowly, their footsteps quiet against the damp ground. Some carried flowers gathered from nearby fields. Others carried nothing at all. There was little left to give. The front pews filled first. Elderly women folded trembling hands in their laps. Farmers removed worn caps and stared toward the floor. Mothers held their children a little closer than usual. At the center of it all sat Thomas Miller. 12 years old. Thin shoulders. Neatly combed brown hair. A dark jacket that had belonged to his father before the war changed everything. He sat perfectly still. Too still. The small wooden coffin rested several feet away beneath soft candlelight. White lilies surrounded it. Their scent drifted through the church, gentle and sweet. Someone in the back of the room quietly wiped away tears. Another person lowered their head. A woman beside Thomas began crying before the service even started. But Thomas never moved. He stared straight ahead. Blinked only occasionally. His hands rested on his knees as though he had practiced sitting that way. As though he feared even the smallest movement might break something inside him. The pastor spoke softly. He spoke about kindness. About family. About hope. He spoke about Emily's smile and how she had always shared what little she had. He spoke about the way she looked after her younger brother when times became difficult. Several people began crying harder. Thomas did not react. The words reached everyone else. They seemed unable to reach him. When the congregation stood to sing, Thomas stood. When they sat, he sat. Every action was correct. Every movement happened at the proper moment. Yet there was something missing. Something that made people glance toward him and then quickly look away. Because grief was expected. Tears were expected. But this silence felt different. He did not look angry. He did not look brave. He looked distant. Like someone standing on the far side of a frozen lake. After the final prayer, villagers approached one by one to offer condolences. A farmer placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. An elderly woman told him his sister had been loved by everyone. Another man leaned down and said, "You're a strong young man." Thomas nodded politely each time. Nothing more. No tears. No trembling voice. No visible pain. As the church slowly emptied and footsteps faded into the cold afternoon, the bell rang once more above the village. Thomas looked toward the coffin. His expression never changed. And for the first time, a quiet question began moving through the room. What if the boy wasn't strong at all? What if something inside him had simply stopped feeling? The village spoke about Thomas Miller for days after the funeral. Not because he had caused trouble. Not because he had said anything unusual. People talked about him because he had not cried. In a place where nearly everyone had lost something, tears had become familiar. They appeared at dinner tables. They appeared in church pews. They appeared during long walks home beneath silent skies. Grief had become part of daily life. Yet Thomas moved through each day untouched by it, or so it seemed. The morning after the funeral, he woke before sunrise. Pale light slipped through the cracked bedroom window. Dust floated through the air like tiny silver threads. He pulled on his clothes, buttoned his worn jacket, and walked downstairs without making a sound. The house felt different now. Larger somehow. Empty in places that had nothing to do with furniture. Emily's chair remained beside the stove. Her favorite blue scarf still hung from a wooden hook near the door. A book she had been reading sat on the windowsill exactly where she had left it. Thomas looked at each object briefly before turning away. His Aunt Clara was already in the kitchen. She stirred a small pot of oatmeal while rain tapped softly against the roof. She watched the boy enter and waited for some sign that yesterday had finally reached him. None came. "Did you sleep?" she asked quietly. Thomas nodded. "A little. Would you like more breakfast?" "No thank you." His answers were polite. Simple. Controlled. The way an adult might answer. Clara stared at him for a moment longer before looking back down at the stove. She did not know what frightened her more anymore. A child crying every day or a child who never cried at all. Outside, spring continued its slow return to the countryside. Birds nested beneath damaged rooftops. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in stone pathways. The world seemed determined to keep moving forward. Thomas followed that example. Each day he found small jobs to do. He carried water from the village pump. He stacked firewood behind the house. He swept dirt from the front steps. He repaired loose fence boards with careful hands. If someone asked for help, he helped. If someone thanked him, he nodded. Nothing more. Villagers began calling him brave. They said it when he passed by. They said it during conversations. They said it in whispers when they believed he could not hear them. "That boy is stronger than most grown men. He is handling it remarkably well. Emily would be proud of him." Thomas heard every word. None of them seemed to matter. One afternoon he walked to the edge of the village where a small stream wound through a field of fresh green grass. It had been Emily's favorite place. She used to sit beside the water for hours, tossing pebbles and watching the ripples spread. Thomas stood there alone now. A cool breeze moved through the trees. The water reflected patches of sunlight between drifting clouds. Somewhere nearby, a robin sang from a branch. He remembered exactly where Emily used to sit. He remembered the sound of her laughter. He remembered how she always carried pieces of bread for the birds. The memories arrived clearly. Sharp. Undamaged. Yet they seemed to belong to someone else's life. Thomas felt nothing. No tears. No ache. No anger. Only silence. He crouched near the water and stared at his reflection. A thin face looked back at him. Tired eyes. A boy who seemed older than 12. He waited for sadness to come. It did not. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The stream continued flowing. The birds continued singing. The wind continued moving through the grass. Everything worked exactly as it should. Everything except him. Deep inside, beyond the silence and the stillness, something had frozen solid. And no one in the village understood that the absence of tears was not proof that Thomas was healing. It was proof that he had not even begun. Weeks passed, and the village slowly settled into a new rhythm. The roads grew busier. Farmers returned to their fields. Shopkeepers reopened doors that had remained closed for months. People spoke more often about the future than the past. Yet Thomas Miller seemed untouched by any change. Each morning began the same way. He woke before dawn. He completed his chores. He ate whatever food was available. Then he searched for another task to fill the hours. Work had become a shelter. As long as his hands remained busy, nobody asked questions. As long as he kept moving, nobody noticed the emptiness behind his eyes. One cool morning in May, Aunt Clara found him stacking firewood behind the house before sunrise. A thin mist floated across the yard. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh grass. Thomas lifted each log carefully, placing them into neat rows. His movements were precise. Mechanical. Almost effortless. Clara watched from the kitchen window for several minutes. The boy had not laughed in weeks. He had not argued. He had not complained. He had become easier to care for than ever before, and somehow that frightened her. Most children stumbled after loss. Most children needed comfort. Thomas seemed to need nothing. When breakfast was ready, she called him inside. He washed his hands and sat quietly at the table. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily above them. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Everything felt ordinary. "You do not have to work all the time," Clara said. Thomas looked up briefly. "I like staying busy." "Why?" He lowered his eyes toward his bowl. "There is always something that needs to be done." Clara wanted to say more. She wanted to ask what happened when there was nothing left to do. But she remained silent. Deep down, she already knew the answer. Thomas feared stillness. Because stillness left room for memories. Later that afternoon, he walked through the village carrying a small sack of potatoes for an elderly neighbor. The woman thanked him warmly and pressed a homemade cookie into his hand. "Emily always liked these," she said with a gentle smile. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Thomas's face. Not sadness. Not joy. Just surprise. Then it vanished. He thanked her politely and continued down the road. The cookie remained untouched in his pocket. That evening, rain arrived. Soft at first. Then steady. Water drummed against rooftops and flowed through narrow gutters. Thomas sat beside the window in his bedroom watching droplets race down the glass. Across the room stood Emily's old dresser. Her hairbrush still rested on top. A faded ribbon lay beside it. Clara had suggested packing away her belongings several times. Thomas always answered the same way. Not yet. He never explained why. The truth was simple. Removing the objects would make her absence real. Leaving them in place allowed him to pretend that time had merely paused. As darkness settled over the village, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills. Thomas remained by the window. Hours passed. The rain continued. The room filled with shadows. Finally, he stood and crossed the floor toward Emily's dresser. Slowly, he picked up the ribbon. Blue. Slightly worn at the edges. He remembered seeing her tie it into her hair countless times. He remembered her laughing whenever the wind pulled it loose. The memory arrived clearly. Every detail remained intact. Yet the feeling attached to it seemed trapped behind a locked door. Thomas stared at the ribbon for a long moment. Then he carefully placed it back exactly where it had been. Outside, rainwater streamed down the glass. Inside, the silence remained unbroken. Somewhere deep within him, grief waited patiently. Hidden. Unmoving. Like a river frozen beneath winter ice. By early summer, new faces had begun appearing in the village. The war was over, but its aftermath moved slowly across the countryside. Trucks occasionally rolled through the narrow roads. Officials arrived with clipboards and questions. Aid workers distributed supplies. And sometimes, American soldiers passed through on assignments nobody bothered explaining to local children. Most villagers kept their distance. They were polite when necessary. Cautious when possible. Life had taught them to be careful around strangers. Thomas Miller treated the newcomers the same way he treated everyone else. He nodded. He listened. Then he moved on. One warm afternoon, he was repairing a loose section of fence near the edge of town. The sun hung high overhead. Grass swayed gently beneath a steady breeze. Somewhere beyond the fields, a church bell marked the hour. Thomas worked alone, focused on the task in front of him. A hammer rested beside his knee. Several weathered boards lay stacked nearby. He never noticed the military jeep until it stopped 50 feet away. The engine fell silent. A door opened. Boots touched the ground. Thomas kept working. The visitor watched him for several moments before speaking. "That fence has been leaning for weeks." The voice carried a calm American accent. Thomas glanced up. The man appeared to be in his early 30s. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Sunlight reflected from a silver watch on his wrist. His uniform was neat but worn from travel. "It bothered me," Thomas replied. The soldier smiled faintly. Most people would simply walk around it. Thomas returned his attention to the fence. "That does not fix it." The soldier nodded as though he appreciated the answer. "Fair point." For a moment neither spoke. Wind rustled through nearby trees. A bird landed briefly on a fence post before flying away again. Finally, the soldier stepped closer. "William Carter," he said. "Sergeant." Thomas hesitated. "Thomas Miller." William extended his hand. Thomas looked at it for a second before shaking it. The gesture felt awkward. Adults usually treated him like a child. This man had introduced himself as if speaking to an equal. William glanced toward the repaired section of fence. "You do good work." "It is only a fence." "Maybe." William looked out across the field. "But you care enough to fix it." Thomas did not answer. The conversation should have ended there. Yet William remained. Not forcing words. Not filling the silence. Simply standing nearby while the afternoon drifted forward. It was strange. Most adults tried to comfort children. They asked questions. They offered advice. William did neither. Eventually he crouched beside the fence and picked up one of the loose boards. "Need a hand?" Thomas blinked. "You know how. I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma." Thomas considered that for a moment. Then he handed over a nail. They worked side by side without speaking much. The rhythm felt easy. Hammer. Nail. Board. Sunlight. Breeze. Time passing quietly. When the final section was secured, William stood and brushed dust from his hands. "Looks better." Thomas nodded. "Yes." William reached into a canvas satchel hanging from his shoulder. He pulled out an apple and placed it on the fence rail. Bright red. Perfectly round. "For the carpenter," he said. Thomas stared at it. Nobody had given him a gift in months. "I cannot pay for this. Good thing I am not selling it." For the first time, something almost resembling a smile appeared at the corner of Thomas's mouth. It vanished quickly, but William noticed. He noticed something else too. The smile never reached the boy's eyes. Those eyes remained distant. Quiet. Buried somewhere far beyond the field and the summer sky. William had seen that look before. Not in children. In soldiers. Men who had carried grief for so long they no longer knew how to put it down. As he walked back toward the jeep, William glanced over his shoulder. Thomas stood alone beside the repaired fence, holding the apple in one hand. Small against the vast green landscape. Silent beneath the afternoon sun. And for reasons he could not fully explain, William found himself wondering what had happened to make a 12-year-old boy look so tired.